Order, please. Before we begin the daily routine, something I just want to bring to the attention of the members. Something I've noticed over the last week, particularly, I guess, is two issues. Is one that it seems that there's a lot of referring to members in the House by their name, first or last, and sometimes both, which I think all members would realize, according to Bouchain, certainly is against the rules, and I think it's been customary in this House as well, to when making mention of a member to call them by the name of the constituency as opposed to their name. The other one as well, which is in the same rules when referring to a minister of the Crown, to refer to that minister's portfolio as opposed to using other names. Which, and I believe that actually, in regards to debate in this House, that it's only right that we adhere to the rules, and I would ask all members to reflect upon that when they're in debate in this House. Before we begin the day routine, the subject for this evening's late debate was submitted by the honourable member for Guysborough Port Hawkesbury. Be it resolved, members of this House recognize the tremendous boost the gas industry has provided to the economy of the constituency of Guysborough Port Hawkesbury. Be debated this evening at 6 p.m. Begin the day routine, presenting reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notice of motion. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, and Municipal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas it is estimated that we have more than 13,000 motorcycle enthusiasts in our province, and whereas 800 to 1,000 new motorcyclists learn to ride responsibly every year through the efforts of the Nova Scotia Safety Council. And whereas motor vehicle mishaps are one of the leading causes of death and injury for the youth of Nova Scotia, therefore be it resolved that this House proclaim the month of May to be Motorcycle Awareness Month and urge all citizens to take part in observances designed to increase awareness and understanding of motorcycle safety. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this week, May 5th to 11th, is Mental Health Week, and the Canadian Mental Health Association Nova Scotia Division is sponsoring activities recognizing individuals who have contributed to the mental well-being of their community. Whereas inclusion and acceptance of people with mental illness is an important social justice that needs to be recognized. And whereas the theme, Respect, Don't Reject, is a public campaign that challenges attitudes about mental illness, which will help create a more open and supportive work, family, and community environment for people dealing with mental illness. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House commend the CMHA, Nova Scotia Division, its staff and volunteers, for whose tireless efforts ensure that we respect, don't reject. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in the past 3 years we put more than 700,000 new reading books in Nova Scotia classrooms from primary to grade 7 with our Active Young Readers and Active Readers program. And whereas this week 321 schools with grade 4, 5, and 6 students are receiving another 88 books each for a total of more than 28,000 new books in our schools. And whereas today I had the honour of delivering a set of these books to the enthusiastic young readers in Karen Boyd's combined grade 4 and 5 class at St. Mary's Elementary School in Halifax. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize this infusion of books in our schools and the efforts of our teachers in using them to help young Nova Scotians develop a lifelong love of reading. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas through a combination of active and compassionate therapies, hospice palliative care addresses the physical, psychological, social, spiritual, and practical needs of individuals who are dying and their families. And whereas hospice palliative care spreads across care settings and involves a variety of health professionals, as well as family caregivers and volunteers. And whereas in the fall of 2002, the Department of Health initiated a project to develop a provincial approach to hospice palliative care. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me in recognizing this week, May 5th to 11th, as National Hospice Palliative Care Week, and take this opportunity to thank caregivers across the province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, if we finished government notice of motion, I wonder if I could have the concurrence of the House to revert to the order of business, tabling reports, regulations, and other papers.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
My capacity as Attorney General and pursuant to Section 51 of the Judicature Act, I hereby table amendments to the civil procedure rules that were made pursuant to the Judicature Act by the judges of the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia on the 22nd day of April 2003.
Table. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 71 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Civil Service Collective Bargaining Act, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 71 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Civil Service Collective Bargaining Act.
Bill 46, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 71 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Civil Service Collective Bargaining Act.
Order this bill be read a second time at a future date. Notice of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if you could clarify for me if we refer to the minister as the minister responsible for insurance, or would it be the Minister of Environment and Labour?
As I understand the rules, it would be the portfolio the Minister is responsible for. In that case, it would be the Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Minister of Environment and Labour, who is responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates, claims that his government's policy is to freeze auto insurance rates effective May 1st, 2003, until he decides what to do about them. And whereas Nova Scotians renewing their auto insurance after May 1st continue to receive drastic rate hikes, either having been reclassified or lumped into some category insurers have created through their ultra-secret underwriting rules, or forced to take involuntary insurance coverage to the Facility Association. And whereas the Minister's solution to this confusion is to advise Nova Scotians who have questions to call the Superintendent of Insurance, which they've been doing for 2 years with no satisfaction because the Superintendent has no power to affect rates whatsoever. Therefore, be it resolved that the Minister of Environment and Labour, who is responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates, admit that any measure he takes to stop auto insurance rate hikes are 2 years past due, too little, too late to provide any real relief for today's family from auto insurance rates spiraling out of control. Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
Here, no. Noes is tabled. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Edward Kite of Grand Lake Road, Cape Breton, will be celebrating his 90th birthday on May 14, 2003, and whereas Mr. Kite has been a distinguished community leader for many years, having been a long-time member of the Grand Lake Road Volunteer Fire Department, a municipal councillor for many years, warden of the former County of Cape Breton Municipality, and chairperson of the former Cape Breton County Joint Expenditure Board, and whereas these accomplishments are only a few of his many achievements over the years. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this legislature congratulate former Warden Edward Kite on his 90th birthday and wish him many more years of health and happiness. And I would ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Prime Minister and his federal Liberal government in Ottawa have placed Canadian soldiers in Afghanistan in an incredible position where an advance party of our soldiers, our men and women, are walking the streets without guns because a routine agreement under NATO has not been signed. And whereas, adding insult to injury, the National Defense Minister has responded by dismissing the criticism as nonsense and a total non-issue. And whereas currently our contingent of Canadian military personnel are being guarded by German soldiers, and according to Major General Louis Mackenzie, a former commander of peacekeeping troops in Bosnia, and quote, Canadian soldiers are more than likely the only adults in Afghanistan who are not armed. Therefore, be it resolved that all MLAs in the House of Assembly condemn the inaction of our federal Liberal government, inaction which has placed our Canadian soldiers in what is not only an embarrassing situation, but also a very dangerous position for our young men and our young women in Afghanistan. And I seek waiver of notice, Mr. Speaker.
There are no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Mr. Speaker, and I'll be introducing this resolution on behalf of myself and, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the member from Sackville-Beaverbank. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas tonight the Lake District Recreation Association will host Sackville's 24th Annual Volunteer Appreciation Night. And whereas tonight Sackville area volunteer organizations will be given the opportunity to honor a member of their organization for exemplary service over the past year. And whereas 83-year young Ollie Perry has been a Legion member for 35 years, delivered for Meals on Wheels for 13 years, and drives seniors to doctor's appointments, among other things, will be honored this evening as Sackville's Volunteer of the Year. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate and thank all volunteers, especially Ollie Perry, who has been selected as Sackville's Volunteer of the Year. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas since yesterday's sitting, the NDP have become even more dependent on the Regina Manifesto of 1933 as a source of ideas and inspiration. And whereas the more dogmatic socialists are particularly impressed by the manifesto's conclusion that their primary purpose is to eradicate capitalism and to put into effect a full program of socialism. And whereas the NDP as a party does not make these ultimate objectives known, but instead poses as a lobby group for improved insurance programs and better care for the elderly, resolved that the NDP should be encouraged to mail copies of the Regina Manifesto to all householders here so that they can better understand where this party is coming from, rather than being lulled to sleep by pious assurances that the NDP really cares.
Notice is tabled. The honourable member Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the stigmas associated with mental illnesses are barriers to the help sufferers of mental health problems need, and perpetuate confusion and misunderstanding among families, friends, and co-workers. And where if those barriers are to be broken down, mental illness needs to be addressed and understood by the public, and education is the key. And whereas in association with the Kings County chapter of the Canadian Mental Health Association, Brian Reid of Kings County has taken up residence until May 23rd in a 16-square-meter room set up in New Sobeys store for 6 days a week, demonstrating symbolically how confined mental illness leaves people, as well as allowing the public to ask questions. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House applaud Brian Reid on his unique way of bringing mental health education to the public and showing those who suffer from mental illness how to cross the barriers to get the help which they need. I request waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm wondering after reading this resolution if I may be permitted an introduction. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the competitors from Canada's 10 provinces and 2 territories gather in Ottawa to compete at the nation's annual snow sculpture contest, and whereas this competition brings out the best in one's imagination and artistic ability in crafting a block of snow into an object that attracts the attention of the public and judges, and whereas the Nova Scotia team of Ray LaFrenz, Nigel Manny, and James McMahon did just that by winning the Artist's Choice Award this year in this year's competition. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulate the Nova Scotia team of Ray LaFrenz, Nigel Maney, and James McMahon on winning the Artist' Choice Award at the 2003 Nova Scotia the Canada Snow Sculpture Contest in Ottawa. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Question waivers are agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Introduction.
Speaker. And also, I'd like to bring to your attention in the West Gallery two members of the trio, Ray LaFrenz and Nigel Manning. If you would please stand and receive the warm welcome of this House.
Certainly welcome our special guests to the gallery today and hope they enjoy the proceedings. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas after a 5-month wait, Donald Marshall Jr. underwent surgery for a double lung transplant Monday in Toronto. And whereas Donald is in a critical stage right now, and the next 24 hours will determine the success of the operation and the working capacity of his new lungs. And whereas the transplant was promoted by chronic obstructive pulmonary disease that forced Donald to rely on an oxygen tank at times to breathe. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House wish Donald Marshall Jr. the best possible recovery and a safe trip home from Toronto to his native province of Nova Scotia. I would ask for a waiver of notice.
Agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas for a century and a quarter, the Advance has provided news coverage for the people of Liverpool and surrounding areas, and whereas between the years of 1878 and 1889, the newspaper was a folded sheet measuring 24 by 15 inches, not quite, and with but a 3-day interruption in the presses after the Great Fire of 1895, the paper continued production, this time on a small folded sheet measuring 9.5 by 6.5 inches. And whereas the building which houses the newspaper was the only structure left standing in the burned area of town after the Great Fire of 1895, a testament to the 125 years of service this paper and its staff throughout those years have loyally provided to the community. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me in congratulating the Liverpool Advance for 125 years of dedicated professional service to its readers, spanning across 3 centuries, and wish them many more productive years of providing news to the people of Queens County and beyond. Mr. Speaker, I request a waiver.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be asking for waiver and passage without debate. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas lacrosse is a growing popular sport in our schools, whereas numerous young women and men are playing this great sport, whereas Brookside Junior High School's girls lacrosse team captured the regional lacrosse championship by beating Sackville Heights 17-15. Therefore, be it resolved that this Nova Scotia Legislature offer its congratulations to the members of the Brookside Junior High School girls regional champion lacrosse team. I ask for a waiver and passage without debate.
What's for waivers? Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Ryan McLeod, Tim Malcolm, and Blair McDonald from the host school of Sherwood Junior High in Sydney recently competed in the Nova Scotia Provincial Junior High Debating Championships, and whereas after winning 2 parliamentary style and 2 cross-examination debates, this team competed as the affirmative side of a debate on whether there should be a distinction between the private and public lives of elected officials to end the competition with a 5-0 record. And whereas the next step for these debaters, as well as Brendan Doyle, is to travel to Saskatchewan and represent Nova Scotia at the National Debating Championship. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House of Assembly congratulate these young men for their success and wish them all the best in the upcoming national competition. I would ask for a waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas grade 8 students at West Pictou Consolidated School have been conducting an experiment in conjunction with the University of Guelph in Ontario and the Canadian Space Agency to learn about surviving on Earth's oldest neighbour, Mars. And whereas these students are conducting an experiment called Tomatosphere that involves growing tomato seeds from seeds exposed to environments similar to those found on Mars. Whereas the goal of this experience is to answer questions regarding the possibility of growing food on Mars, which would be necessary for space exploration to the red planet to become a reality. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House commend the grade 8 students of West Pictou Consolidated School for their notable contribution to the Canadian space program and wish them much success in their scientific endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Donald Marshall Jr. has lived a remarkable life, having inspired a 1989 Royal Commission report that recommended sweeping and fundamental changes to the justice system in Nova Scotia. Whereas Donald Marshall Jr. also helped establish that Mi'kmaq and Maliseet peoples have a right to earn a living from hunting, fishing, and gathering. Whereas Donald Marshall Jr. is currently recovering from a double lung transplant operation this past Monday in Toronto, surrounded by family and friends. Therefore, be it resolved, this House offer its best wishes for a speedy recovery to Donald Marshall Jr. from his double lung transplant, and its appreciation to the family and friends who are providing care and comfort to him during his ordeal. And I would seek waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax, Bedford Basin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the tradition of police shaving their heads to raise money for cancer research began in 1994 in Edmonton, when 2 officers met a boy who had lost his hair during chemo and was being unfairly teased. And whereas in the region of Halifax, 3 top officers, Acting Police Chief Frank Beasley, Acting Deputy Chief Tony Burbridge, and Acting Deputy Chief Chris McNeil, were recently shorn for this very good cause. And whereas for these officers, the cause has come close to home as family members and close colleagues battle this fearful disease. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House commend the selfless acts of these Metro Police officers for such a tremendous cause. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waivers are agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Ron and Vicky Bardo of Clarence and Annapolis County are beaming with pride over their daughter's accomplishments in the medical profession. And whereas their daughter, Dr. Jean Bardo Shoveler, was honored late last fall when she received national recognition for her work in cancer research and became the recipient of the Dorothy J. Lamont Scientist Award. And whereas Dr. Shoveler is now an assistant professor at the University of British Columbia in the Department of Health Care and Epidemiology, credits her success on the education she received at home in Lawrencetown and when she took her undergrad and master's at Dalhousie University. Therefore, be it resolved that MLAs acknowledge the tremendous work in cancer and medical research being done by Dr. Jean Bardo Shoveler and wish her every success with all her future efforts. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers is agreed. All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the member for Glace Bay should attempt to do some homework before painting Nova Scotia's economic picture as close to a recession as he did last Thursday afternoon in the legislature. And whereas if the member from Glace Bay had done his homework, he would have realized by knowing that the Greater Halifax Partnership said recently, and I quote, Nova Scotia's economy is outperforming even the most optimistic projections. And whereas the Toronto Dominion Bank in forecast analysis a few weeks ago stated, and I quote, the Nova Scotia government is facing a steady and growing stream of black ink over the next 5 years, providing it with some additional fiscal flexibility going forward. Therefore, be it resolved, the next time the member from Glace Bay rises to speak in the legislature, he make an attempt to get at least some of his facts straight. And I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver. Here and no. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Atlantic Journalism Awards are presented annually to recognize excellence in journalism in Atlantic Canada, and whereas each year, no, but they should, I hope. Anyway, whereas each year the awards honor the top students from Atlantic Canada's 6 journalism schools, and whereas this year King's Tech student Penny Hannum is the recipient of the Canada Post Corporation Journalism Prize for Excellence in her journalism program, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House join me in congratulating Penny Hannum on winning the 2003 Canada Post Corporation Journalism Prize from the Atlantic Journalism Awards and wish her much success in her journalistic career. I request waiver.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Pier 21 recently celebrated its 75th anniversary, and at that time Pier 21 Society announced the new 5-year strategic vision set to transform Pier 21, whereas over the next 5 years the Society wants to expand Pier 21's immigration span of 1928 to 1971 to also tell the story of all immigrants to Canada, from the initial contact with our First Nations people to present day. Whereas the goal of the Society is to turn Pier 21 into Canada's National Immigration Heritage Centre, a place where Canada's cultural diversity is celebrated. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House join me in wishing those involved with the Pier 21 Society success in transforming Pier 21 into a National Immigration Heritage Centre. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Cape Breton Post has received second place in the Canadian Newspaper Association's Best Practices Competition for Marketing and Promotion for a Small Newspaper, and whereas the Post was awarded this impressive standing for its national comprehensive work, marketing and promoting the campaign for the 2003 IIHF World Junior Hockey Championship in Sydney, and whereas committed to the community, the Cape Breton Post campaign involves a multitude of reader and carrier contests and on-ice promotions. Therefore, it be resolved that all members of this House congratulate the Cape Breton Post on its exemplary work on the campaign for the 2003 IIHF World Junior Hockey Championship that earned them second place in the National Newspaper Association's Best Practices Competition. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
Waiver is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the pink stucco stable on the corner of Bill Road, Summer Street has been a landmark in the city of Halifax for nearly 100 years, and whereas the members of the Halifax Junior Bengal Lancers have used this heritage property now for 67 years, and as the old building needs some care, plans have been made for renovations and upgrades, and whereas with the help of the municipality, the Bengal Lancers have already raised nearly half their $1 million goal, and with the first stages of upgrades set for completion this summer, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House congratulate the Halifax Junior Bengal Lancers on their remarkable success to date and wish them well in their efforts to upgrade their downtown home. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver? Here and no. The notice is tabled. Order, please. Orders of the day or questions put by members. Question period will begin at 2:33 and then at 4:03. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Environment and Labour, who incidentally also happens to be responsible for the skyrocketing insurance premiums in his province. My office is being flooded with calls from people who just received renewal notices with increases taking effect in the next 30 to 60 days. They have called their insurance companies and they're all being told the same thing, which is pay up. Right. Why? Because although the increases are taking effect after May 1st, after the May 1st deadline, the insurance companies requested them before May 1st. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, will the minister explain to this House why he has done nothing to stop these types of continued rate hikes for Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Speaker, the leader of the New Democratic Party is the enthusiastic proponent for socialized insurance, and I'd like to bring to his attention that he is I believe, promoting a system that has dubious ancestry. Mr. Speaker, the insurance problem is not confined to Nova Scotia. Now, I know that the honourable member opposite finds that difficult to believe, but it extends right across this country. It extends right across North America and, in fact, around the world. And in point of fact, Mr. Speaker, there is no province, including the province of Manitoba, which has found an answer to this problem. Mr. Speaker, I did some checking on... Okay, thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the minister should know that Manitoba has had a rate freeze for 5 years and returned $80 million in premiums to their insured. Mr. Speaker, I want to table the bill of Margaret Crouse. Her insurance is going up effective May 18th. Margaret Crouse heard about the rate freeze, called her insurance company, and they told her, pay up. Mr. Speaker, the rate hike affects Margaret Crouse on May 18th, but it still goes ahead because her company requested it prior to the minister's May 1st deadline. So I'd like to ask the question, Mr. Speaker, what are you doing to keep Margaret Crouse's insurance from taking another jump on May 18th?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, if the province of Manitoba has had a rate freeze for 5 years, that would mean that their rates back in 1998 would be the same as it is today. And, Mr. Speaker, if that was the case, then they must have had atrocious rates in 1998, because at the present time, Mr. Speaker, rates in Nova Scotia are lower than they are, in most cases, in Manitoba.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, he's just making it up as he goes along, you know. Mr. Speaker, the truth is there's nothing this minister can do. He isn't doing anything for Margaret Crouse and all the other Nova Scotians out there because his rate freeze is almost useless. People are reading about a freeze one day and they are paying higher insurance bills the next. So, Mr. Speaker, we're right back to where we started with my question for the minister responsible for these rates. And it's this: why aren't you doing anything to reduce car insurance rates in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, far better than what the NDP is doing, I can assure you that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have a plan. Our plan is moving forward, Mr. Speaker. We will have some of our solutions announced in about 3 or 4 weeks, and we will have legislation in this House, Mr. Speaker, introduced by this government following the election, which will indeed produce lower rates for Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Through the campaign.
Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Premier. Well, Mr. Speaker, welcome to 2005. Mr. Speaker, if there were any doubt the spring election is coming, they should be put aside today. Mr. Speaker, after saying he wouldn't discuss Sunday shopping until 2005, now we have a half-baked measure announced today. Mr. Speaker, with this Premier, flip-flop is now the norm. And, Mr. Speaker, here is a list of the Premier's famous last words. Over our first 4-year mandate, we will ensure the debt will not increase. Promise broken. $1.5 billion is enough for health care. Promise broken. Next year, the borrowing will stop. Another promise broken. And, Mr. Speaker, this is my favorite. My last favorite, or his last favorite about Sunday shopping. And I quote, Mr. Speaker, I quote the Premier. Quote, "We have made a decision. We intend to stick by it." Close quote. My question to the Premier. Since he's willing to set aside half his principles with today's half measure, why won't the Premier simply allow Sunday shopping every Sunday during the year?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And obviously, unlike the member opposite, who obviously puts no value on giving Nova Scotians a choice, this government is keeping a commitment that is one that was articulated very clearly on page 19 of the Blue Book, that a John Ham government will listen to Nova Scotians and act accordingly to the expectations and priorities of Nova Scotians. Nova Scotians have been in dialogue with me for over a year now on this issue. They have asked for a choice, and today, Mr. Speaker, we have announced to Nova Scotians we will give them that choice.
The honourable member Cape Breton South on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, my first supplementary is to the Premier as well. And Mr. Speaker, I'm not the one that broke the promises I alluded to in my opening question here. He did. Mr. Speaker, the Premier has obviously lost his way. He has no idea what he stands for other than re-election. Mr. Speaker, on July 16, 1999, the Premier said, "You can't run government on gimmicks and you can't build a province by being glib." Mr. Speaker, that's not respect for Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, this is nothing but a pre-election gimmick to carry the Premier into the next election. It's not real policy, it's a gimmick, and that's no respect for Nova Scotians.
Hear, hear.
It does nothing for the tourism industry, Mr. Speaker. It does nothing for the economy, and it still puts northern Nova Scotia at a disadvantage. My first supplementary to the Premier, Mr. Speaker, is given the fact that the people of Amherst won't like this decision, why won't the Premier simply allow for Sunday shopping on the other 46 Sundays of the year so that the tourism industry and businesses in northern Nova Scotia can survive and thrive?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member from Cape Breton for the compliment. It's the first time in my life I've been called glib. The member opposite fails to realize that this government has had monstrous success in growing the economy. We have had an economy that has been at a high boil since we have initiated opportunities for prosperity and our way to keep our economy going. And, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite may not have any appreciation for the values and the uniqueness of our province, but this caucus does.
Hear, hear. The honourable member for Cape Breton South on your final supplementary.
I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, that last statement of the Premier will be one that will be repeated over and over again in the future in this province when it comes to the accountability of that government. Mr. Speaker, my final supplementary, this Premier has proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he believes in nothing. Mr. Speaker, today the Premier threw his moral values out the window for politics. And Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia has never...
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. To question the integrity of any member in this House is unparliamentary, and I ask the honourable member to retract that, please.
Mr. Speaker, then the Premier has thrown his values out.
Ask the honourable member to retract that, please.
He's thrown his values out. Well, I'll retract the word moral, yes.
The honourable member Cape Breton South on his final supplementary.
Even if it is true.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. I'd ask the honourable member to retract it or take his place.
I just retracted it, Mr. Speaker. I'll retract it.
Enough said. The final supplementary,
Nova
please.
Scotia, Mr. Speaker, has never seen such a power-hungry Premier. This is a government... This is a government, Mr. Speaker. This is a government run by polls. I noticed the Justice Minister was the minister who made the statement we wouldn't discuss this issue till the year 2005. And he sits in his place and he laughs.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member. Order, please. The honourable member. Order, please. The honourable member for Cape Breton South in his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this is a government run by polls and not principles, and that means bad policy. This half-baked pre-election scheme will help no one. Mr. Speaker, my supplementary, why won't the Premier tell Nova Scotians why he feels 6 weeks of Sunday shopping is better than 52 weeks of Sunday shopping?
The honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'd be quite prepared to respond to the minister or to the member opposite in a very positive way if he would provide us with the answer why overnight, on the direction of his leader, he reversed his position on Sunday shopping.
The honourable leader of the official opposition.
That's why I talked about his morals, Mr. Speaker, right there. He doesn't have any. Flying to the House now.
Mr. Speaker, skyrocketing insurance rates are forcing Nova Scotians to make some very tough choices. Margaret Crouse is 70 years old, and like many people in this province, she is on a fixed income. Margaret Crouse also suffers from arthritis and relies on her car even more than most people do. In April, she received the news that her insurance is going up again. Mr. Speaker, Margaret Crouse now says that she's going to have to choose between her medication and her car. My question to the minister is this: and it's very simple. How are you going to help Margaret Crouse?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we will not be helping Margaret by instituting the system that they have in Manitoba. Mr. Speaker, as I'm sure you're aware, and most people in this House, they have a no-tort system in Manitoba. This honourable member opposite, Mr. Speaker, is suggesting that we have a system the same as the province of Manitoba. So therefore, he is saying that he would adopt a system of no-tort insurance, and yet in this House, Mr. Speaker, he has stated that he doesn't want no-tort insurance.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the minister well knows that there are many forms of public auto insurance, including no fault and tort, and that the key fact is that it is public auto insurance. Thousands of Nova Scotians are making sacrifices to pay for increased insurance rate, but this government, frankly, Mr. Speaker, just doesn't get it. In the last 2 years, Margaret Croce's insurance has jumped by 100%. Now she has to choose between her medication and her car. There are thousands of people in the province who may be forced to make similar choices. Mr. Speaker, frankly, it's just not fair. So I'd like to ask the minister, what will it take for you to show some leadership and really help Nova Scotians by lowering auto insurance rates?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, this government is sympathetic with people such as Margaret who are faced with large increases in their insurance premiums. And, Mr. Speaker, we are doing everything we possibly can in this party to rectify that situation. And, Mr. Speaker, we took a very significant step yesterday, Mr. Speaker, when we introduced our bill to freeze auto insurance rates until 2004.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the reality is that the steps taken by this government are almost meaningless. They won't do anything more than delay auto insurance rate increases. And these increases, Mr. Speaker, are leaving a mark on almost every doorstep. Thousands are driving without auto insurance. Many more are choosing not to insure their children. And an unknown number of seniors, like Margaret Crouse, are making decisions to choose between their medication and their insurance. Minister, surely this has to be the final straw. When will the minister finally give Nova Scotians a real break by lowering auto insurance premiums in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, we are giving Nova Scotians a real break because we're doing something which is more than what that side is doing.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, my question again is to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Premier promised strong leadership and a clear course during the last election. And Mr. Speaker, today's announcement is another flip-flop, and Mr. Speaker, the list is growing. Today's announcement, Mr. Speaker, proves that the Premier is providing neither. Some people are against Sunday shopping, Mr. Speaker, but most are in favour. The measure today will satisfy no one. Mr. Speaker, after telling Nova Scotians he wouldn't discuss the issue until the year 2005, all of a sudden the Premier has changed his mind. Obviously, the polls are telling him what to do, not his conscience, Mr. Speaker. And my question, how can the Premier justify this measure as anything other than a ploy to get re-elected?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I can remind the member from Cape Breton South that it's over a year ago since I publicly announced that I was going to consult with Nova Scotians on the very vexing problem of Sunday shopping here in Nova Scotia. Since that period of time when I began the consultation, I have literally talked to thousands of Nova Scotians, and many of them chose to discuss Sunday shopping with me. And they indicated the intense interest of Nova Scotians in that issue. It was an interest that I could not ignore. It is an interest that prompted me and this government to do what we did today, to give the ultimate choice on the issue of Sunday shopping, to put it to a plebiscite and give the people the opportunity to make that final choice.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the plebiscite issue is one that we certainly would like to discuss with the Premier. Why, in every issue of some problem for Nova Scotians, why don't we have a plebiscite? Why are we just having one on this particular issue, Mr. Speaker? Now, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians will be asking what this Premier stands for, and it will become apparent, Mr. Speaker, to those listening and watching today that he stands for one thing: saving his government. Everything else is secondary. The Premier is proving he doesn't care about good policy, only good politics. This Sunday shopping measure, Mr. Speaker, is neither good politics or good policy, because it means business in the tourist section will be at a disadvantage, and it means business will not grow in the Amherst area, for example. And my question to the Premier: why has the Premier sacrificed his credibility by not implementing good public policy, which is to allow Sunday shopping all year and not just before Christmas, something the people of Nova Scotia clearly want?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the announcement today that I made indicates that there will be a trial period of Sunday shopping in the upcoming pre-Christmas season for 6 Sundays, following which in the fall of the year 2004, people will have an opportunity by way of a plebiscite to decide 3 outcomes. Number 1, pre-Christmas Sunday shopping only. Number 2, year-round Sunday shopping. Or the third outcome could be no Sunday shopping. The ultimate democracy, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton South on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the people of this province want the issue settled now, not after the next election, Mr. Speaker. This is another flip-flop, and I attended the press conference, Mr. Speaker, in the Red Room, which stated that which the question was asked: if you have polls, why won't you give them to us? And he couldn't even remember who did the poll, what the poll said, and whether or not it was in favor of Sunday shopping or not. That's the kind of answers we get from this Premier. My final supplementary to the Premier, Mr. Speaker: now that the Premier has set those principles aside, will he, at the very least, be honest and admit that this decision has nothing to do with Sunday shopping and everything to do with your electoral chances?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I believe that the electoral chances of the government will entirely depend on its ability to report to Nova Scotians as to whether or not it has kept the commitments that it made to Nova Scotians in 1999. And today I kept a commitment that is on page 19.
Order, please. The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I kept a commitment to the people of Nova Scotia, and I will read it to you, Mr. Speaker. It is on page 19 of the Blue Book. And it reads very accurately: we believe Nova Scotians are right to demand greater openness, accountability, and participation. A John Ham government will be a government that listens to Nova Scotians and acts in accordance with their priorities and expectations. Mr. Speaker, that was a commitment we made, and today it is a commitment kept.
The honourable member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Environment and Labour. This government's so-called freeze on skyrocketing auto insurance is fooling no one. There are a number of ways insurance companies can continue to gouge drivers. One way is to make young drivers the principal operator of an extra vehicle in the house. And I'm going to table documents by Perth Insurance that show they reserve this right. Making young drivers the principal driver, if it's a male, will likely add $3,000 to anyone's insurance policy. My question for the Minister of Environment and Labour: using your terms, what blunt instrument are you going to use to stop this practice?
Hear, hear.
Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member had taken the time to read the bill, he would have discovered that we also have regulatory powers in this bill.
The honourable member for Timberlea Prospect on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Christine Poirier, 18 Elm Grove Avenue, Timberlea, knows only too well how insurance companies are gouging drivers. Christine's a single mother. Her 20-year-old son still lives at home with her. Christine has 2 vehicles on her policy, one that's broken and one that she can't afford to fix up, and another one that she's using to get by in the meantime. Now, she's being told by her company that her son is going to be listed as the primary driver as one of these vehicles, no matter what she says. The move will cost her upwards of $3,000. So my question to the Minister, Christine Poirier, needs some real answers. How long will it take you, Mr. Minister, to realize that your so-called freeze is full of holes?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know how many times I have to tell the honourable member that are opposite. He's accusing the bill of having holes in it. I think there are holes in other places in that gentleman's anatomy. Mr. Speaker, we have the ability within the piece of legislation to enact regulations which will take care of abuses by insurance companies.
The Honourable Member for Timberlea Prospect on your final supplementary.
Proper tone. We use the proper tone, don't we? Christine Poirier says she feels that her insurance company is twisting her arm. She says she had to tell her son he couldn't get his driver's license because she couldn't afford the insurance rate it could cause. Have you ever told a teenager you can't get your license because I can't afford the insurance? Mr. Speaker, insurance companies are gouging drivers any way they can. In this case, this young man. Minister, when do you plan to address all the loopholes you've ignored? I've read the legislation. Have you?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, we're trying to get the legislation through the House. When we get the legislation through the House, we'll have regulations. When we have regulations, we'll take care of abuses.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Environment and Labour, who obviously loves to study the sky these days because of skyrocketing insurance rates. The Minister has frequently expressed his outrage about the discriminatory treatment of older drivers. The NDP Task Force on Lower and Fairer Auto Insurance Premiums reported just today, Mr. Speaker, that the only insurance plans that do not discriminate on the basis of age, gender, marital status, or family status are the driver-owned, not-for-profit plans. So I want to ask you, Minister, why doesn't your discussion paper ask Nova Scotian drivers if they want to end any and all discriminatory practice on the basis of age, gender, marital status, and family status?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, as part of the mandate of the consumer advocate for auto insurance, is to take into consideration all those matters that are brought to his attention, and I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, that he is receiving an earful from senior citizens.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the minister surely knows. He said at his own press conference that was off the table. He said that himself. So now he's retracting it here in the state, in this building, Mr. Speaker. But you know, Mr. Speaker, if Nova Scotians were relying on protection that was as effective as this government's approach to auto insurance, surely the birth rate would double, Mr. Speaker. The Tories aren't doing anything about discrimination rates set by their friends, the private insurance companies. They're leaving every single discriminatory rule in place as is forever. So does this minister responsible for the insurance rates in this province think that discrimination rates have ended in BC, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, just because the roads are flat?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell the honourable member that a gentleman by the name of Keith Heathcliff from Dartmouth heard about a friend of his in Manitoba who renewed the insurance on his vehicle, which was a 1999 Chevy S10 4x4 pickup, and the cost, he saw the cost of the renewal premium, it was $1,350, and he gave the various extras on top for liabilities, etc. He checked in Halifax, Nova Scotia, for the cost of that insurance and found that it was $1,121, or $230 cheaper.
I'll member Cape Breton Centre on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, isn't it great? Isn't it great that they have the CBC Information Morning Show to do their research for them, Mr. Speaker. And as it is, it's half-hearted, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives' discussion papers ask 9 questions about how to limit auto benefits, Mr. Speaker. There isn't even a single question about discriminatory rates in this Tory paper. Discrimination isn't even on their radar screen, Mr. Speaker. People want auto insurance rates to be based on their driving record, not on age, not on their gender, and certainly not on their marital status, Mr. Speaker. So I want to ask this minister, why has this government ignored the harsh and discriminatory rates categories imposed on Nova Scotian drivers by their friends, the international private insurance companies?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I always appreciate having friends, but I don't know exactly whether or not the insurance companies are friends of mine anymore. They're not too happy, as I understand it, with the actions of this government. But, Mr. Speaker, I can assure the honourable member opposite that I share his concern that, for instance, senior citizens are discriminated in the rating of their insurance policies by insurance companies in this province.
The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, once again today we see that the Premier's own statements and his commitments mean very little in the face of an election. Speaker, on March 25, 2002, the same Premier said, quote, "Last year you and I and all Nova Scotia taxpayers paid $900 million in interest on our debt. We pay $2.5 million each day. This is more money than we spend to educate all children in grades primary to 12. To be sure, there are some people who suggest that government should continue borrowing on its debt and spending beyond its means. I don't believe there is merit to this argument. Such an approach might feel good today. However, we need to ask ourselves, who pays for it tomorrow?" End quote. My question to the Premier is, why is the Premier, after 4 long years in office, continuing to have our education system suffer because of continued high debt service charges, which now outstrip education spending in this province?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the member opposite does bring to the attention of the House the difficulty we are having paying the interest charges on the provincial debt. And, so much of it actually accrued in the 6 years between 1993 and 1999. In fact, almost a third of the debt was accrued in the 6 years of Liberal rule before we became government. And it is quite a burden to deal with that, Mr. Speaker, but we're getting the job done, we're dealing with it, and we have brought the fiscal management policies that we talked about in 1999. We have brought those things to come to pass, and we will provide the kind of money management that this province needs and certainly didn't have under the previous administration.
The honourable member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
You know, Speaker, 4 years this Premier has had, yet he continues to blame other administrations for his own failures in his 4 years in office. So, Speaker, that's not what he said in 1999. In 1999, he said he would not increase the debt. He did not continue to refer to previous administrations. What we see is another broken promise. So, Speaker, the mere interest on our debt is the equivalent of $6,600 for each student in our current education system. After 13 years of schooling, we will fork out $85,000 in debt servicing charges for each and every student in our education system today if this debt continues to remain unconstrained by this government. My question to the Premier is, how can the Premier, after 4 long years in office, sit there knowing that he has continued down the road of higher debt and higher debt service charges, much to the detriment of our children and grandchildren?
The Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member opposite would not knowingly mislead the House, but he made a reference as to what we would do with debt management back in 1999. And I will again refer, Mr. Speaker, to the Blue Book. And on page 18, I will remind the member opposite of our policy on debt management in 1999 and the management which we would implement during the course of this mandate. And it reads exactly, Mr. Speaker, exactly. Establish practical targets for reducing the provincial debt which has increased by almost $3.6 billion during 6 years of Liberal government.
The honourable member for Richmond on your final supplementary.
No, Mr. Speaker, the Premier can read from page 18 or other pages of Blue Book till the cows come home. What we have here is comments you made last year, Premier, where you said you did not believe we should continue borrowing. You said it was wrong. You said it was immoral. You said it was irresponsible. Yep. You said you would not do it. These are your words, sir. They're not mine. They're no one else's. They're not the previous administrations. They're not the lieutenant governors or no one else. They are your words, sir. You have failed in your commitment to Nova Scotians made last year. Regardless of what you want to say in your Blue Book, we now spend more money to foreign banks than we spend on the education of our children after 4 years under your administration. Shame on you, Mr. Premier. You are the person who led this government to this day where we now pay more to foreign banks than we pay for our children's education.
Order, please.
My question is...
Order, please. Your Honor, just remind the honourable member to direct his questions through the chair, please, as opposed to the honourable member Richmond on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 4 years under this Premier's administration, I ask, why has this Premier, with all the commitments he made in 1999 and even last year, allowed both the debt and debt servicing charges to grow, thereby breaking his promise to our children and his grandchildren?
Honourable the Premier.
My first budget address.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And when I speak with passion about the debt, it is with real passion, because that's what drove this government to make the hard decisions to balance the budget, at the same time to find funding for health care and roads and for education. We have a question coming from a caucus that in 6 years did not reduce the deficit of this province 1 cent.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Halifax Shabakto.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I have a question for the Minister of Environment and Labour. The Minister, of course, is also...
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Halifax Shabakto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Environment and Labour, the Minister also widely known as the Minister responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates. Mr. Speaker, the Minister has tabled his draft regulations on automatic assumption for firefighters stricken by cancers related to that occupation. That was very welcome information for the firefighters and for everyone who supports them. But the Minister is promising regulations on the circumstances in which an insurer must maintain, renew, or issue an automobile insurance policy. I would like to know from the Minister when the Minister responsible for skyrocketing insurance rates will table his draft insurance regulations. When?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the House Leader for the New Democratic Party just said after the election. And in point of fact, Mr. Speaker, we will not have the revised legislation until after the election, because it will be in the fall session, which will probably be after the next election. But, Mr. Speaker, I can assure the honourable member that we're going to receive an interim report from our consumer advocate. And based on his recommendations, Mr. Speaker, it's quite possible that we will be formulating some regulations very, very shortly to take care of some of those problems which he is enunciating.
Now, member for Halifax Shabakto on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when this government thinks it has good news, it is very eager to share. But every driver in Nova Scotia wants to know how the government proposes to require insurance companies to provide fair, non-discriminatory coverage. And every driver deserves an opportunity to know what is in those draft regulations before we go any further. What I'd like to know from the Minister is why he did not release draft regulations when he first announced his government's decision to postpone insurance rate increases until next January.
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, formulation of Regulations 101 for the honourable member. First of all, Mr. Speaker, you must know and you must derive from the comments of the constituents that you are serving exactly what the problems are, and then, Mr. Speaker, within the framework of your legislation, frame regulations. Mr. Speaker, we've been very clear about this all the way along. We've said that we are freezing rates of insurance so that we have an opportunity to go out and speak to the people of Nova Scotia and determine what they want, which is more than this crowd over there did, Mr. Speaker. They took 3 of their caucuses, walked around the province, talked to some of the members of their party, and then came back with a perfect solution. Socialize the insurance industry in Nova Scotia.
Member Halifax-Shabakto on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's a non-answer that I hope gets widely circulated. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, every day the minister responsible for skyrocketing insurance tells this House that his party has a plan. And every day drivers can see for themselves that this government is making it up as they go along. People have discovered the minister's legislation is full of loopholes. They deserve an opportunity to see just how bad the regulations are going to be. So I'd like to ask the minister, when you promise regulations to protect drivers from unfair discrimination, I would like to know, why should we believe you now?
Now, Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member asked why should they believe us now? Well, because, Mr. Speaker, the public know that they can trust this government. We came forward with 231 recommendations, and we have implemented them all but about 2, probably, Mr. Speaker, since we came to power.
Now, member for Halifax-Shabakto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A question to the same minister. My party put the public's concern about automobile insurance on the agenda 15 months ago, and then this government knee-jerked by asking the UARB to examine the issue. Rates continued to skyrocket. The second knee-jerk came 2 months ago when the minister issued a biased consultation paper. Rates continued to skyrocket. Yep. The third knee-jerk came a month ago when the minister appointed George Jordan. Rates continued to skyrocket. Now we have knee-jerk reaction number 4, legislation staying execution until January 1st, 2004. Mr. Speaker, does this minister expect Nova Scotians to be fooled by a series of knee-jerk reactions into believing he has a plan for actually lowering auto insurance rates? Lowering.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, this party on this side of the House is not going to react in a knee-jerk fashion to the problem, Mr. Speaker. We're going to come to a reasoned solution. And I know that the party opposite is the party of simplistic, socialistic type of answers to every problem that comes along. Either put more money to it or else nationalize it.
Gentleman member Halifax-Shabakto on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. The minister's plan is not about lowering insurance rates. It's about trying to trick Nova Scotians into believing that skyrocketing auto insurance is not an election issue. The biased consultation paper rules out any other option except the status quo in which the big insurance corporations continue to provide the insurance. Right. The best, that paper says, is that they might contain rising insurance premiums. Minister, that's the system we have right now, and it's not working. Mr. Speaker, will the minister admit that he was so embarrassed by the actions of the insurance companies that he was forced to take his most recent knee-jerk reaction before daring to go to the polls?
Absolutely.
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know how often we have to tell the member opposite that we have a plan. We are working on that plan, Mr. Speaker, and we're taking the steps necessary, Mr. Speaker, to put in place an insurance regime that will satisfy all Nova Scotians.
Now, member Halifax-Shabakto on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, here are a couple of hard facts for the minister. Citadel Insurance increased its rates by 12.9% in the last 2 months. Economical increased its new business rates by 10.1% on April 1st. Cooperators raised rates by 15% in March. These skyrocketing insurance increases are already in place. This minister's latest knee-jerk reaction offers no hope for lower auto insurance premiums.
Right.
Mr. Speaker, to the minister, I'd ask the minister, how does your knee-jerk plan of delay and deception forced upon you by widespread public outrage?
Order, please. He used that word's unparliamentary. I'd ask the honourable member to retract it.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, how does...
For Halifax Shabakto on your final supplement.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Just go ahead.
Minister, how does your knee-jerk plan of delay forced upon you by widespread public outrage offer any hope at all for lower auto insurance premiums?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, when we introduced that legislation into the House on, I think it was Monday or Tuesday of this week, Mr. Speaker, there were 13 applications for increases that were before the Public Utilities Board that had not been approved. And, Mr. Speaker, the hundreds and hundreds of Nova Scotians who would have been affected by those increases will now not get an increase in their insurance policy.
The honourable member for Victoria.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. Following the floods in March, the Premier and his minister travelled the province in helicopters with all the bells and the whistles, offering so much help. Still, all we see is an extension for the flood disaster applications, even though it seems more to do with politics than policy. Elizabeth and Robert Young of Glenelg, Guysborough County, suffered $48,000 in damage, yet disaster relief is still stalling on whether it will cover the costs or not. They have a $10,000 insurance, but that simply will not repair their home. My question to the Premier is, how can your government justify a $68 million tax scheme and not help out hard-working families like the Youngs?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I refer that to the minister responsible for the federal program.
The Honourable Premier.
And for the information of the House, I knew that the member or the minister was to be late for the House, but I thought he had joined us, and I apologize to the member opposite. I thought he had joined us a few moments ago. But he will be here. He will be here. But what I will say to the good member opposite, that we are concerned that the citizens of Nova Scotia who are affected by the recent disaster look at all of the options that are available to them under the Disaster Financial Relief Program, and if their situation in fact qualifies, to be sure and get their information in. The minister just recently extended the deadline by 2 days. 2 weeks, sorry, by 2 weeks.
For Victoria on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again to the Premier. Robert Young was working in Alberta, so he's not going to get the $155 check, Mr. Premier. He lost $8,000 worth of carpentry tools, which he relies on his livelihood for. They lost, among other things, their freezer, their furnace, and an air exchanger. A propane tank was pulled from the side of the house, and a neighbour's oil tank overturned, possibly contaminating the drinking water. In fact, the Department of Environment wouldn't even provide an assessment of the contamination, so the Youngs were forced to pay $200 out of their pocket. So my question to the Premier is, will this government cover losses of the Youngs, like carpentry tools, which are so vital to the Youngs' employment?
Well, the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I refer that to the minister covering for the Minister of Natural Resources.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Yes, indeed, I do know about floods, Mr. Speaker. My area was very much affected, but I want to tell you that it was under this government, Mr. Speaker, that it was this government that adopted the federal financial disaster assistance scheme, and it was under us, and if it hadn't been for what this government did, there would be no assistance available for your constituent or for the other constituents. Now, I can tell you that that scheme is pretty well put out by the federal government. There are strict parameters around it, and from what you have said to me, obviously there would be a number of things that would be included in that. Now, if this is his summer home, Mr. Speaker, it does not cover summer homes, it covers primary residences.
Member for Victoria, on your final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. No, to the Honourable Minister, it's not their summer home, it's their home. Again, I guess the Premier will defer the question to whoever he wants, but it's still going to the Premier. The $155 will not help the youngs, even if they could get it. That wouldn't even cover the cost of testing their drinking water. So why won't this government provide adequate disaster relief so that families like the Youngs can move forward and rebuild and get on with their lives?
The Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do know a number of persons around this province who have been very significantly negatively affected by the flooding, and the member opposite brings to the attention of the House another one. All we can say to the member opposite that he should encourage that Nova Scotian to put in his application, because if I'm reading what you said correctly, there would be a number of items that could be covered under the program. But until you see all of the details, it is impossible to make a commitment.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government boasts about all the numbers of people leaving employment supports and income assistance to join the workforce. The reality is supports for families leaving assistance for employment have been cut, and it is difficult for them to make ends meet. One family left employment support when the mother found work, and as a reward, their rent in public housing increased retroactively by $200, even though their income is the same. I asked the Minister of Housing and Community Services, why would this family's rent increase when their income is the same?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member opposite for his question. I'm not sure of the specifics of the case, but I do acknowledge that community services does not pay as much to housing services for the rentals. It all comes from within the same department. There are some very positive things that we've done with the Employment Support and Income Assistance Program to assist people into getting back to a career. The specifics of this case, I would have to see them and before I could comment.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North, on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will remind the minister that this is a negative and he should take a trip to the office. Mr. Speaker, this family is now $2,000 in arrears, and they are in fear of being evicted. They did what they had been encouraged to do. They found work and got off of employment supports. With children living at home and no ability to pay the bills because their rent increased, they were better off when they were on the system. I asked the minister, why has your department turned its back on this family as they try to leave the welfare system?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, the honourable member is referring to a specific case. Until I can see the case, I'm not sure that I'm able to comment with any sort of authority on it, and of course I'm not able to do that publicly anyways. But I would say, Mr. Speaker, that one of the things about the new employment support and income assistance system is that I've met many people that have used it that previously under the old systems, whether it was the old municipal systems or the family benefit system, they were frustrated because they were not able to take jobs because maybe the cost of childcare or the cost of transportation or the cost of getting supplies precluded them from doing this. And with the new system, those people and the caseworkers are telling me that it's working much better, and it's been a real godsend for many Nova Scotians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Dartmouth North, on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I acknowledge the minister that he ought not to speak with specifics on this floor. But I would remind the minister that this is not the only case in the Department of Community Services, and it's time to take a visit. Mr. Speaker, this is just one family who's finding it hard to get out of the trap of the employment trap. Their income is the same as it was when they were on assistance, but there is nothing in place to help them until their prospects improve. nothing to help them until their prospects improve. I asked the Minister of Community Services, how can you expect families to make the move to employment when this is the kind of treatment they can expect from your department? And Mr. Speaker, there's more than one.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, there are a number of other very positive things that have happened during the term of this government to assist people in getting off of community services and developing a career and the self-esteem that comes from that. One was the end of the clawback, Mr. Speaker, and now with the new monies that the federal government have announced to augment the provincial monies that go into the National Child Benefit, all that flow through to those families, and that would be the case here. That would be over $3,000 per child per year, Mr. Speaker. And Housing Services does provide a wonderful service to low-income Nova Scotians to help them with affordable housing. There are a lot of wonderful things that are going on within the Department of Community Services, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, today we read that the Halifax School Board is talking about the problems with education funding formula. Speaker, this is an issue that has been raised consistently by other boards across this province, including the Strait District Board, which is in the Minister of Education's own writing. Mr. Speaker, as the Minister knows, the Strait Board alone is losing 15 teaching positions next year. Mr. Speaker, this is a board that has consistently been arguing for a funding formula that is based on program needs and not student numbers. And yet, Mr. Speaker, we continue to see this government put their own re-election ahead of the education needs of the students throughout this province. My question for the Minister of Education is, when can students, parents and school boards in this province expect to see a new program-based funding formula as promised by your government?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. And the fact is that parents and students and the people of this province are seeing increased funding for education in this current fiscal year. We will continue to address the needs of students and the needs and problems created as a result of declining enrollment are being addressed by the department, and we will be coming forward with recommendations from a group that is studying that particular situation in the very near future.
The Honourable Member for Richmond, on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, 4 years they've had to keep this commitment, and yet on the eve of an election they tell us we will come with a plan just before an election. 15 teaching positions again cut from the Strait Board this year. Mr. Speaker, a quick review of Department of Education statistics tells us the tale. Total enrollment in Nova Scotia schools is projected to drop from 150,733 students in the current school year to 138,124 students in the years 2006-2007. Mr. Speaker, in this 5-year period, that means that Nova Scotians will lose 12,609 students from our education system. Mr. Speaker, with an outdated funding formula that eliminates one teacher for a drop in enrollment of 26 students, that translates into 485 fewer teachers in this province by the year 2006-2007 under this government's current formula. My question to the Minister is, what assurances will this government give to parents, students and school boards across this province that they will not be losing teaching positions due to continual declining enrollments?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member would know that indeed, despite declining enrollments, we are increasing funding to education in this province. And we will continue to address the needs of education and make it a priority. And the honourable member would also know that the 127 new teachers have been hired this year in order to fill specific objectives of this government to address the needs of students based on the basics of reading, of language, and of mathematics computations. Those are the priorities of this government, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to fund the needs of the students of this province.
The honourable member for Richmond, on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what a great track record they have. One just has to look at the last set of standardized tests in this province, and they can stand up and let the minister stand up and brag what great results they've shown for education. The numbers speak for themselves, Mr. Speaker. He says that he wants to hire 127 new teachers. What he doesn't tell us is how many teachers are retiring and will not be replaced as a result of their retirements. That is the real number that this government is not showing. Mr. Speaker, on page 25 of the Premier's infamous Blue Book, he can flip through it as he's sitting there smiling, it says that he's committed to, quote, reviewing funding formulas to protect schools in areas of declining enrollments from detrimental and untimely reductions in teaching staff, end quote. Mr. Speaker, the problem is that students are not having access to the programs they need in our system. I ask again to the Minister of Education, will he commit to a new funding formula for the 2003-2004 school year so that all students in this province, including the Strait Board, will have access to the same quality of education regardless of where they live in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And what we will commit to is continued accountability to the people of this province for the performance of our education system. And the results that the honourable member refers to, Mr. Speaker, the basis of those results are steeped in the years in which they had control over the education of this province. And we are addressing those concerns, and we're accountable to the people of the province. We will continue to be accountable, and we will continue to provide the sort of measurements that are required so that people can see that accountability. And that's a far cry from what the people got from that crew when they were in office, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, Happy Haven is a community-based small care home in Petit Riviere. It made headlines earlier this year when residents were threatened with forced relocation. The families were left out of the process, their role as legal decision makers was ignored, and they questioned the motives behind the action. In a letter dated April 4th to the Minister of Health from the families, which I'll table, Mr. Speaker, several comments and recommendations are made. However, the families have not yet received a response. So I want to ask the Minister of Health, when can these families expect to get a response to their correspondence of April the 4th?
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, staff in my department as well as some other departments have been reviewing that report and discussing their response to it. And my information is that we'll be releasing that, our response to the families sometime next week. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham on your first supplementary.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, the families raised some very important issues about residents' rights and the manner the Department of Health officials and the Fire Marshal's office intervened in this situation. Families, in fact, say in their letter that one department official states families were only keeping their parents at an unlicensed home so they could protect their inheritance. These concerns about the treatment of the owners of Happy Haven, their residents, and the families must be addressed. So I want to ask the Minister if she has undertaken to investigate any of the complaints or the concerns that were raised in this correspondence by the families.
The honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, some of the things that happened or were alleged to have happened down at Happy Haven was of great concern to me when I first got into this portfolio. That is the reason that I've met with the families at the office, why I have visited Happy Haven, why we've set up a working group to look at how our department officials and the Fire Marshal's office work together or don't work together, as the case may be, to make things easier for seniors and their families. And that is precisely the reason why we are doing this report, and it is of utmost importance to me that this be accomplished. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham on your final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to seeing the report, and I want to ask the Minister if there will be any kind of an action plan from the department put in place, because I know that there are other similar situations around the province, and the families do not want to see this situation occur in some other part of the province.
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, Mr. Speaker, part of the action plan will be a new code of conduct, if you will, about involving families and seniors more in decisions to move them. But I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that the situation with some of these unlicensed and even some of the licensed boarding homes is an issue that is quite large across Nova Scotia, and it is a problem that it will take a number of years to solve in its entirety. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, last month this government announced that their Learning for Life plan will hire 127 more teachers for September 2003. Mr. Speaker, I believe that maybe the House could use some clarification on what the announcement actually means for Nova Scotia. So, Mr. Speaker, does it mean 127 new teachers on top of the number of teachers we'll have at the end of June of this year? Or does it mean these new teachers will only be for grade primary and resource, as dictated under the Learning for Life plan, Mr. Speaker? So my question to the Minister is, yes or no, Mr. Minister, will there be more teachers teaching in September of this year than the number of teachers we will finish with at the end of June?
The honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell the honourable member that there will be more teachers committed to the priorities of this government, the Learning for Life priorities, next year, 127 more than there are this year, Mr. Speaker, committed to the priorities of this government and delivering their commitments.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Minister didn't answer my question. Mr. Speaker, enrollment is going down across the province every year. The amount of teachers we have in the classroom continues to decrease, and next year is going to be no different, Mr. Speaker. School boards across the province have indicated they'll be looking at reducing the number of teachers they have on staff. Why then, Mr. Speaker, is this government issuing press releases that state there's going to be 127 more teachers next September when it's truly not the case, Mr. Speaker? My question to the Minister is, when did the definition of open and accountable government change to one where a government is issuing misleading press announcements, Mr. Speaker?
The honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank the honourable member for the question. Mr. Speaker, we have put forward a plan to address the priorities of this government, and those priorities relate to the basics of education: literacy and writing, computations, looking after the needs of the primary, following year the grade 1, the following year grade 2. And to meet those commitments, there will be 127 teachers additional dedicated to those commitments, the commitments of this government, Mr. Speaker, and that's what we are telling the people of this province, and we're very proud of the program that we have and that we're committed to.
Member for Glace Bay on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister told Nova Scotians there'd be 127 additional teachers starting in September. Now he's telling us that's not necessarily the case, or he's just refusing to answer the question altogether, Mr. Speaker. But here are some of the facts that we know. This province funds its education system the second lowest in the country. Our enrollment is declining. We're aware that our test scores for our children are abysmal, Mr. Speaker. We also know this government has not seen our children as an investment, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the Minister is, I've asked him to simply give me the number of teachers as of September, but I want to know, when will the Minister admit, finally then, he and his predecessor have failed to give our educational system the proportionate amount of funding that our children so rightly deserve, Mr. Speaker?
The honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when the members of that caucus were over here as government, they had a Department of Education that was directionless. There were no priorities. nothing was happening, and the test results that we see are as a result of a lack of dedication on their part to the priorities of education. We're committed to the priorities of education, Mr. Speaker, and we're putting money in order to hire additional teachers committed to those priorities. They never had a plan. We have a plan, and we're very proud of it.
The member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There continues to be no movement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There continues to be no movement on the labor dispute between the Regional Residential Services Society and its care workers who have been off the job for nearly a month. Residents and their families continue to suffer while this government sits idly by, refusing to take part in resolving this job action. We know the RRSS has been sending its bills to the community services, its sole funder during the strike. I asked the Minister of Community Services, how much money has his department spent to date for the replacement services and other expenses incurred during this strike?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've not got an up-to-date bill as of this week, but the last time that I was briefed on this, there were no additional invoices that had been sent to the department because of the strike.
The member for Dartmouth North on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, this government appears to be intent on breaking the union, once again thumbing its nose at organized workers in this province. It's quite willing to spend thousands of dollars a day to pay the replacement workers and other expenses rather than allow RRSS to enter binding arbitration with the union. In spite of the willingness to rush the arbitration for big businesses like P3 school operators and the casino, this government is refusing to end this strike. I asked the Minister of Community Services, why won't you simply authorize RRSS to enter binding arbitration so the residents can go home?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in addition to the comments made previously about the substantial resources that this government has put into funding that sector, I would point out that when the decision was made to go on strike, that there was no provision in the contract that provided for binding arbitration. Mr. Speaker, that is something that is sometimes part of the agreement between the employer and the unions and under special circumstances, but the union would have known that at the time that binding arbitration was not part of the collective bargaining process.
The member for Dartmouth North on your final supplement.
Remind that honourable minister that there doesn't need to be a provision in the collective agreement. The minister has the responsibility to do that. Mr. Speaker, this government's treatment of the vulnerable residents is reprehensible.
Absolutely.
The minister indicates that he's tired of answering the questions about strike, but I'm here to tell him he'll keep asking those questions until he starts giving answers that show one iota of concern for the residents and their families. Mr. Speaker, I asked the minister, how many more months are you willing to sit idly by and allow this strike to drag on before your government allows binding arbitration to go forward?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, there's a number of points that I'd like to touch on there, but I think the important one is that it is the care of the residents and trying to address the concerns of their families that is a paramount concern to this government. We recognize there's a difficult situation with the labor dispute, and we are doing all that we can through our care coordinators, and I know RRSS is doing the best that it can to try to assist the residents and their families. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton and the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Education. On November the 22nd, 2001, in a response to a question from me, the Minister of Education at the time, Minister Purvis, indicated the construction of the Rankin Memorial School in Iona would be built according to the timelines indicated on the construction schedule. Mr. Speaker, now issues have arose with the site chosen for this new school. And according to legislation, the minister's staff must have been involved in this process from day one. My question, why, Minister, has your staff recognized or failed to recognize these issues before now?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. As I understand the situation, Mr. Speaker, the community have a preferred site. In order to use that preferred site, there are access problems with respect to Phase 3 power, and that would add a considerable expense to building the school in that particular site. However, we are working with the National Research Council to see if we cannot find alternate sources of power that would permit the school to proceed on the site identified.
The honourable member for Cape Breton and the Lakes on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to table the reply that Minister Purvis provided to me on November of 2001. Mr. Speaker, this is a rural area of Nova Scotia. It is hard to believe, according to a newspaper article yesterday, and I will table that article as well, that local school board members believe this government has cash flow problems, or that Nova Scotia Power does not have the ability to develop a three-phase power line in a rural community. Now, Mr. Speaker, my question, will the minister please agree to approach Nova Scotia Power officials personally in hopes of keeping the school project on time?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps I was remiss in my response to the first question when I didn't add Nova Scotia Power to the as a group that are working with the National Research Council and the Department of Education in order to attempt to find a solution to this problem. And I can assure the honourable member it is something that we are taking a very keen interest in.
The honourable member for Cape Breton and the Lakes on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, that certainly doesn't answer my question. And Mr. Speaker, I've been previously involved in a project involving three-phase power in which I was successful as a lone municipal representative at the time, a lonely one only, and I was able to convince Nova Scotia Power to construct a three-phase line on a street that's half the size, the length that's required for this new site. Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister again is if I can do it as a municipal representative, he has the authority of the entire government of the province of Nova Scotia. Will he approach Nova Scotia Power in an effort to request Nova Scotia Power construct this line to ensure that this school is built on time? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
I want to thank the honourable member for the question, Mr. Speaker, and again, I can assure the honourable member that we are very anxious to have this matter resolved. If we are successful in employing new technology through the National Research Council, there are considerable advantages, not just for this particular school, but advantages that would have province-wide impact. And we are anxious to explore these possibilities, but we are doing so without a view to unduly delaying the construction of the school. And we will, of course, work with Nova Scotia Power, and if the problems associated with it are not resolved through our work with the National Research Council, then obviously we need to take a new approach to the problem, and we will do that.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, yesterday it was revealed that the government is going to spend $10,000 to collect blood samples from teachers and students from Barrington High School, sent them to a lab in Beverly Hills, California, USA, to be tested. They're attempting to identify health problems. Parents know the answer, Mr. Speaker. Mold and other environmental contaminants. They already tried to clean the school last year, Mr. Speaker, and the children are still getting sick. My question to the minister, why are you wasting $10,000 of taxpayers' money when students, teachers, and parents all know what is causing the problem? Why are you wasting $10,000 of taxpayers' money, Mr. Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We had the advice of a practicing medical doctor who has worked very closely with the situation at Barrington, and that practicing medical doctor advised that we conduct these tests. And Mr. Speaker, we were told and believe that the results of these tests may assist in determining what is the problem with the students affected, and if we can, by conducting these tests, assist in an analysis and a determination of what is causing the illness, we're quite prepared to do that. And I would point out that it is a voluntary test, and we will learn a great deal from this process.
Member for Dartmouth East on your first supplementary.
Well, he talks about likely and then will learn a great deal. That's very problematic at this juncture. So my question again to the Minister of Education. Students who attend the school have been getting sick since before last spring. When the parents move their children to another school, Mr. Speaker, their health improves. It's pretty clear to the parents what is causing their children to get sick, and it's at school, Mr. Speaker. For this government to send samples to Beverly Hills, California, USA, is nothing more, in our opinion, than a delay tactic to get this government through the next election. Another scam to get them through the election, Mr. Speaker. And my question...
Order, please. Order, please. That's unparliamentary and asking a member to retract it.
Spam is unparliamentary. I will retract that. I'm at a loss for words right at the moment, but I will find a replacement as soon as I can for that.
The member for Dartmouth East on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Scheme. Yes, scheme would be good. To the Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, given that it has been well over a year, Mr. Speaker, since this problem developed, I want to know what plan this government has in place to correct the problems at the school at the Barrington High School.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to, first of all, say to the honourable member and to the House that the information that we will gain from the testing may in fact provide some considerable relief to the students and to the parents of those students if it determines that they are not suffering any further from the effects of the school. It may give us additional information with respect to the causes relative to the school. And I can indicate to the honourable member that we will be indicating our attention with respect to that facility in the very near future.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on your final supplementary.
Minister for that response, but this government, Mr. Speaker, has already carried out over $400,000 worth of tests at the Barrington High School. Now that they're going ahead and spending another $10,000 on the test at Beverly Hills. Well, Mr. Speaker, I repeat, this has only been done so that the government can use these tests as a convenient excuse during an election campaign for failing to act, Mr. Speaker, and this is not acceptable. My question to the Minister, what is it going to take to convince the Minister that the students and staff from the Barrington High School deserve to learn and to teach in a safe and healthy environment?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell the honourable member and the House, Mr. Speaker, that we are conducting these tests on a voluntary basis on the advice of a practicing medical doctor who is a specialty in environmental illness. That, Mr. Speaker, was very sound advice, and we were prepared to listen to the physician, and we took the physician's advice. Mr. Speaker, we are committed to ensuring that the students of Barrington have a safe environment in which to attend school, and we will take a decision that will ensure that that environment is safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries. Hub meat packers in New Brunswick stopped slaughtering beef some time ago, Mr. Speaker, and Atlantic farmers have to ship their beef to Ontario. Co-op Atlantic is building a beef processing plant in PEI to be completed this year or early next, which will be able to process beef production in the Maritimes, including Nova Scotia. In the meantime, however, our beef producers face increased transportation costs, which further reduce already razor-thin margins for many producers. So can the Minister tell the House when he will provide a transportation subsidy to our beef producers until local processing capacity comes online?
The honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member opposite for the question. He raises a very good issue in that we all recognize there is an opportunity for the beef industry in Atlantic Canada. We're working with our counterparts in other provinces to try to develop an economically feasible model. Everyone also recognizes that subsidizing industry does not work in the long run. So what we need to do is put together a business plan that will stand on its own merits, and we're attempting to do that with the industry.
Member for Hants East on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to have that on the record that he's going to say subsidizing industry doesn't work, but they sure are willing to give out money whenever they feel like. Mr. Speaker, the PEI government recognizes that its beef producers are hurt by having to ship beef for processing to Ontario, so it's providing a transportation subsidy to its producers until the Co-op Atlantic plant is up and running. The total subsidy for PEI beef producers is 4 cents per pound. So is the minister prepared to allow PEI beef producers who receive a transportation subsidy to hold a competitive advantage over our producers?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I said in my previous answer, what we're prepared to do as a government is work with the industry to make a model that works. And it is my view, and it's being supported in other jurisdictions, that subsidies are not a long-term solution to industry's needs.
Honourable Member for Hants East on your final supplementary.
Well, if the minister was listening, he would have heard my question when I stated that it was until the Co-op Atlantic plant was up and running. So that's not long term. Mr. Speaker, we've seen that this government was not prepared to give support to pork producers until we opened the eyes of the former minister to the real crisis that the pork producers face. So now that we've put this before this minister, will this minister open his eyes to the plight of beef producers here and match for our producers a transportation subsidy received by PEI beef producers?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in terms of the issue related to the pork industry, the model and solution that we put forward is one that has been looked at by New Brunswick, and they are using it as their model. And again, it was a solution that worked on the merits of the business plan, and that's what this government is attempting to do, is work with the industry in the various sectors to make models that are long-term viable without continued reliance on government subsidy.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova.
Mr. Speaker, a question to the Minister of Environment and Labour. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I introduced in the House this Nova Scotia Government Workers' Compensation Program Response Plan dated July 2002. I've tabled it already yesterday. I trust I don't have to table it again today. I didn't have a chance yesterday to get into what the implementation plan stated, but I do find at pages 1 and 2, one sentence, that the Dorsey report acknowledged that the workers' compensation system could not be fixed overnight and recognized that the recommendations would need to be implemented over time. The implementation plan does not identify a span of time that they are referring to. They simply make that statement. I'd like to ask the minister if, in his opinion, the 15 months that he estimates from July of last year to the fall of this year constitutes an appropriate period of time for implementation of the proposals contained in the Dorsey report.
Environment Labour.
Mr. Speaker, taking into account the complexity of the report, yes, that is about the right time span.
Member for Cape Breton Nova on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we know that the government has already implemented actually 2 proposals of the Dorsey report because they introduced a bill here last fall on supplementary benefits, and they've also appointed a new chair for the Workers' Compensation Board during the intervening time. So that's 2 that they've carried out. There are a number of other relatively simple matters identified by Dorsey, such as on page 4 of the implementation report, that the Deputy Minister not be part of the Board of Directors, that the Chief Appeal Commissioner not be part of the Board of Directors, that the Workers' Advisory Program report directly to the Deputy Minister, and that the OHS, Occupational Health and Safety Executive Director, continue to report to the Deputy Minister. Mr. Speaker, why could not simple proposals like that be enacted at this time? What is the great complexity there that those things could not be done?
Environment Labour.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, those are the administrative matters to be implemented, and, Mr. Speaker, they're well underway.
The Honourable Member Cape Breton Nova on your final supplementary. Mr. Speaker, a question to the Minister of Environment and Labour. Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova on your first supplementary. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have one final supplementary. On page 6 of the response plan, under the heading of summary, appears a statement: the government recognizes the complexity of workers' compensation and the range of issues affecting many different interest groups. The Dorsey report recognized that for many of the recommendations there would be a need to do further analysis, study and review to determine the best way to proceed. I'd like to ask the Minister if he could advise the House whether the further analysis, study and review recommended in this report dated almost a year ago are underway, and if so, what form do they take?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, yes, I can confidently say that they are underway, Mr. Speaker, and they're taking the form of a consult.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, every week I travel to and from Cape Breton, and many residents of mine with disabilities have brought this issue to light. In fact, I checked today, Mr. Speaker, at 11:04 a.m., and the previous minister approved a project in New Glasgow on Route 105, in fact, where the service road, new development was created, and the minister approved with a private developer a $200,000 project. And Mr. Speaker, this new service road, which is